I didn't build the company in a glass office with a view of the city. I built it on the floor of my childhood bedroom, back aching, laptop humming like it might give up before I did. The idea came from a problem no one else wanted to solve, and the solution came from nights when sleep felt like a luxury I couldn't afford. There were no investors then, no applause. Just me, my code, and a quiet promise to myself that if this ever worked, I would never forget how fragile success really was. By the time the company became real revenue, real employees, real board meetings, people started rewriting the story. Suddenly, I was lucky. Suddenly, it was perfect timing. And no one talked about the years I skipped vacations, birthdays, even funerals, because the product wasn't ready to exist without me yet. That's when my sister stepped in. She arrived one afternoon with confidence in her smile and admiration in her voice. "I always knew you'd make it," she said, hugging me tightly in front of the team. It felt good being seen by someone who shared my last name. I wanted to believe that blood meant loyalty, that family success was shared success. I made her head of strategy within months. Not because she knew the product better than I did, she didn't. Not because she understood the technology, she openly admitted she didn't. I gave her the role because she was my sister, and I thought trust was worth more than caution. The board loved her instantly. She spoke fluently about growth, vision, and leadership. She dressed like confidence itself, and knew exactly when to smile, when to pause, and when to repeat my ideas in a more polished way. I didn't notice at first how often the praise meant for me landed on her shoulders instead. "She's a natural leader," one investor said during a meeting. I smiled politely and stayed quiet. At family dinners, she joked about me being the genius behind the scenes, while she was the people person. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, though something inside me tightened every time she said it. Slowly, subtly, she started scheduling meetings without me. She spoke for the company instead of with me. I told myself I was overthinking. After all, she was family. Then came the small exclusions, the calendar invites that arrived late. The decisions already made when I walked into the room. The way people started asking her questions they used to ask me. I watched my own company begin to orbit around someone else, and I couldn't figure out when I'd lost gravity. One night, alone in my office, I stared at the first prototype running on my screen, the same core system I had written years ago, unchanged at its heart. That was when it hit me. Everyone admired the structure, the strategy, the shine, but no one seemed to remember who built the foundation. Including my sister. Trust, I learned that night, doesn't break loudly. It cracks quietly, one smile at a time, until you realize the person standing closest to you has been measuring your place and planning how to stand in it. And I was still naive enough to think blood would stop her from trying. The board meeting was scheduled like any other. An hour, maybe 90 minutes, with coffee growing cold on the table and slides no one would really read. I walked in expecting numbers, projections, the usual arguments about timelines and market expansion. My sister sat 2 chairs away from me, calm, composed, already chatting with a board member as if she belonged there more than I did. Something felt off. The conversation started gently, too gently. Words like alignment, next phase, and long-term vision floated around the room, polished and vague. I waited for someone to mention the product roadmap, the technical risks, the things I had always led. Instead, the focus stayed on leadership. One board member cleared his throat. "We've been discussing the company's future positioning," he said, not looking at me. "And we believe it may be time to consider a transition in the CEO role." The word transition hit harder than any accusation could have. I glanced at my sister. She didn't meet my eyes. They framed it carefully, temporary, strategic, for the good of the company. I was praised for my brilliance, my dedication, my foundational contribution. Then they explained that the company now needed a more outward-facing leader, someone who could inspire investors, someone who could scale, someone like her. I tried to speak, but every sentence I formed sounded defensive even in my own head. So I stayed calm. I nodded. I listened as they explained how I could focus on innovation. while stepping back from the title I had earned with years of sacrifice. When the vote passed, it didn't feel real. I handed over the CEO badge as if it were a borrowed thing, not something I had built from nothing. My sister stood, walked over, and hugged me in front of everyone. "This doesn't change anything between us," she whispered. "It's just business." The next morning proved how wrong that was. My access to internal systems was limited for security reasons. My calendar emptied. Meetings I used to lead continued without me. By the end of the week, the company website had been updated. Her name sat neatly under the title Chief Executive Officer. Mine was gone. I watched her give interviews, telling the story of the company as if it had always been our dream. As if I hadn't carried it alone when no one else wanted the weight. People congratulated her, investors praised her leadership. And I stayed silent because speaking felt like begging. At night, I replayed every moment I had ignored. The jokes, the interruptions, the way she positioned herself beside me in every photo. This hadn't happened suddenly. It had been planned. What hurt most wasn't losing the title. It was realizing that she never asked what stepping into my role might cost the company. Or me. She never checked if I was okay. She never looked back. They thought I was defeated. But while everyone else was focused on chairs and titles, they had overlooked something far more important. Something I had protected long before there were boards or investors or family ambitions. They took my seat. They didn't take what made the company exist, and that mistake was about to matter more than any vote they had ever passed. For a while, I said nothing. I let the company move without me, watched from the outside as announcements were made and confidence was performed. My sister sat at the head of the table now, speaking with authority she hadn't earned, using phrases I recognized because I had once said them out loud to myself at 3 a.m. The board congratulated themselves on a smooth transition. Then the cracks appeared. It started with a delayed product update. A small thing, publicly explained as a strategic pause. Internally, engineers were stuck. Certain components couldn't be modified without my approval. Then a potential enterprise client asked a question that should have had an easy answer. Who owns the core intellectual property? The room went quiet. Legal reviewed the documents, then reviewed them again. Calls were made. Emails grew urgent. What they found wasn't a loophole. It was a foundation no one had bothered to examine. Years ago, when the company was nothing more than an idea and a personal risk, I had protected myself. Every patent was filed under my name. Every foundational algorithm was licensed to the company, not transferred. At the time, it felt cautious. Now it was decisive. I requested a board meeting, not to argue, not to accuse. Just to clarify, I walked into the room with a slim folder and a steady heartbeat. My sister looked confident at first, until the company's legal counsel began to speak. Clause by clause, signature by signature, the truth unfolded without emotion, and that made it hit harder. Without my consent, the company had no legal right to operate its core product. The valuation they celebrated was built on something they didn't own. The silence that followed was different from before. No buzzwords, no smiles, just the sound of understanding arriving too late. My sister finally looked at me. There was disbelief in her eyes, then fear. "You never told me," she said quietly. I met her gaze. "You never asked." Investors panicked. Timelines collapsed. Partnerships were suddenly under review. The board realized that pushing me aside hadn't removed my power. It had exposed their dependence on it. They asked what I wanted. I didn't ask for revenge. I didn't raise my voice or enjoy the moment. I asked for recognition of reality. Many creation, nah. That night, alone again, I opened the original codebase, the same lines of logic that had carried the company from nothing to everything. I felt grief, not for the damage done to me, but for how easily trust had been traded for convenience. They had ignored the clause because they assumed loyalty would replace law. They were wrong. By the time the meeting ended, the truth was undeniable. Titles could be reassigned, stories could be rewritten, but ownership, Real ownership doesn't disappear just because it's inconvenient. The board finally understood something I had known from the beginning. You can remove a founder from the room. You can't remove them from the foundation. The decision didn't come with drama, no shouting, no slammed doors. Just a quiet, irreversible shift in gravity as the board realized the only way forward was to face what they had tried to step around. Emergency meetings followed, then another vote, this one heavier, slower, and far more careful than the last. My sister didn't sit beside me this time. She stared at the table as the board chair spoke about organizational corrections and restoring stability. When the motion passed, her role as CEO ended with the same efficiency it had begun. No speeches, no applause. Just silence and averted eyes. She stood, finally looked at me, and searched my face for something. Anger, satisfaction, victory. I gave her none of it. What I felt wasn't triumph. It was relief. The board turned to me. They apologized. Not emotionally, not convincingly, but officially. The kind of apology that comes with revised contracts, public statements, and carefully worded press releases. I agreed to return as CEO under new terms: clear ownership, independent oversight, no family roles without merit. When I walked back into my office, it felt smaller than I remembered. The chair was the same, the desk untouched, but something had changed. I wasn't coming back as the person who trusted blindly. I was coming back as someone who understood the cost of building, and the cost of being generous with power. The company stabilized quickly, investors calmed once the structure was clear, development resumed. The product moved forward again, grounded in the same foundation that had always held it up. My sister left quietly. We didn't argue, there was nothing left to say. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and betrayal doesn't always come from enemies. Sometimes it comes smiling, convinced it deserves what you earned. I didn't chase revenge, I chose boundaries. Months later, when someone asked me how it felt to win, I thought about the nights I spent alone writing code, the moment I handed over my role without understanding the consequences, and the silence that followed when I realized no one would protect what I built except me. Winning didn't feel loud, it felt clean. I learned that leadership isn't about holding a title. It's about knowing where your real leverage lies. I learned that protecting your work isn't selfish, and that trusting family without structure is just another form of risk. Most of all, I learned that the sweetest revenge isn't destruction, it's survival. It's walking back into the room with your dignity intact, your future secure, and your power quietly restored without needing anyone to bleed for it. They tried to replace me. Instead, they learned who built the foundation, and I never forgot that lesson again.